They called him just the janitor. He pushed his cart through the courthouse halls every morning before sunrise, mopped the same marble floors, emptied the same trash cans, nodded politely as lawyers rushed past without looking at him. No one ever asked his name. To them, he was invisible. Background noise. Someone who cleaned up after important people finished talking. He listened anyway. For years, the trial had been going badly. A high-profile case. Media everywhere. Lawyers arguing in circles. Witnesses contradicting each other. The courtroom felt tense, like something crucial was missing, but no one could say what. The defense attorney slammed his folder shut. "We have nothing further," he said, frustrated. The judge leaned back, exhausted. That was when it happened. A quiet voice spoke from the back of the room. "Your Honor, may I say something?" Everyone turned. The janitor stood there, still holding his mop. A few people laughed under their breath. The judge frowned. "This is not appropriate." "I understand," the janitor said calmly. "But the timeline you're discussing is wrong." The room stilled. The prosecutor scoffed. "And you know this because I was here," the man thought. But what he said was simpler. "Because the security footage you're relying on skips 12 minutes, he said. "And those 12 minutes change everything." Silence spread across the courtroom. Not disbelief. Shock. The judge leaned forward. "What did you just say?" The janitor met his eyes. "For 20 years, he said, I've cleaned this building. I've watched every camera. And I know exactly what everyone missed." No one laughed anymore. Because in that moment, they realized something terrifying. They hadn't ignored a janitor. They had ignored the one person who saw everything. No one ever asked why he stayed. That was the strange part. People noticed when someone climbed. They noticed when someone fell. But they never questioned someone who remained invisible for too long. He had been cleaning that courthouse for 19 years. 19 years of arriving before dawn, when the building still smelled like cold stone and disinfectant. 19 years of unlocking supply closets, filling buckets, pushing his cart through corridors that would later echo with arguments about guilt and innocence. To everyone else, it was just a job. To him, it was a front-row seat. He learned the building faster than anyone. Which doors creaked, which stairwells had blind spots, which cameras froze for a second before switching angles. Security guards came and went. Judges rotated. Prosecutors aged. Defense attorneys burned out. He stayed, and he listened. In the beginning, people noticed him a little. A nod from a junior clerk. A half smile from a tired lawyer. But over time, even that disappeared. He became part of the architecture, something you walked past without seeing. That was when he started hearing everything. People talked freely around those they believed didn't matter. They discussed strategy near the elevators. They argued timelines in the hallways. They rehearsed lies in empty courtrooms, thinking no one was listening. He never interrupted. He never reacted. He just remembered. Once, early on, someone asked him why he spoke so formally. "You don't sound like a janitor," a young attorney joked. He smiled politely. "I read," he said. That was enough to end the conversation. People prefer explanations that don't challenge their assumptions. Before the courthouse, there had been another life. A long time ago, back when his hands were clean and his suits were pressed. Back when his voice carried weight in rooms that looked very much like this one. He had argued cases, written briefs, quoted precedent from memory. He had believed in the law. Then came the case that broke everything. A case that wasn't supposed to be controversial. A case everyone assumed would be easy. It wasn't. He lost. Not because the facts were wrong. Because the truth wasn't welcome. He learned something that year they never taught in law school. Justice doesn't always lose loudly. Sometimes it's buried quietly, under procedure and paperwork. After that, doors closed. Not officially, not dramatically, just gradually. Calls stopped being returned. Invitations disappeared. Opportunities went to better fits. So he left. Not angrily, deliberately. He took the janitor job because it required two things he still had: patience and attention. No one cared who he was anymore, which made it the safest place to be. Years passed. He watched guilty people walk free. He watched innocent people crumble under pressure. He watched attorneys perform for cameras instead of facts. And he learned the rhythm. How cases unfolded. How narratives were built. How truth was trimmed to fit. He never interfered. Because interfering without leverage was just noise. The case that would change everything arrived quietly. No headlines at first. No crowds. Just another file wheeled in on a cart. Just another name written in black ink. But he noticed something immediately. The timeline felt forced. Not wrong. Forced. Like pieces had been pushed together too neatly. He paid attention. The way witnesses avoided specifics. The way the prosecution leaned heavily on a single camera angle. The way certain moments were glossed over instead of explained. He checked the monitors during his shifts. Again and again. That was when he saw it. A 12-minute gap. Not a blackout. Not a malfunction. A skip. At first, he assumed it was a technical issue. But it happened the same way every time the footage was accessed. 12 minutes removed. Always the same block. Always during the same window. That wasn't an error. That was a choice. He followed procedure. Quietly. He mentioned it to a clerk. "It's probably nothing," she said without looking up. He mentioned it to a guard. "Above my pay grade." He mentioned it in a maintenance report. Filed. Archived. Forgotten. So he waited. Because waiting was something he was very good at. During the trial, he watched the attorneys argue about timelines that didn't exist. He listened as experts testified with confidence built on incomplete data. He felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. The weight of watching truth slip away again. He told himself he wouldn't intervene. Not this time. He had done his part. He had flagged the issue. He had followed channels. What happened next wasn't his responsibility. That was the lie he told himself. Then came the moment. The defense gave up. The prosecution relaxed. The judge leaned back. The room felt finished. That was when he realized something terrifying. If he stayed silent now, the lie would become permanent. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking, not with fear, with recognition. He had been here before. Different courtroom. Same silence. He stood, not because he wanted attention, because he could no longer pretend invisibility was neutral. When he spoke, it wasn't dramatic. It was precise. And when the courtroom fell silent, he understood something clearly. They weren't listening because he was a janitor. They were listening because what he said made sense. And once the truth enters a room, it doesn't care who carried it in. For a few seconds, no one moved. The janitor still stood near the back of the courtroom, one hand resting lightly on the handle of his mop. The judge leaned forward, elbows on the bench, eyes narrowed, not annoyed anymore, but alert. "What do you mean?" the judge asked slowly. "The footage skips 12 minutes. The prosecutor was the first to react. "That's impossible," she said quickly. The footage was authenticated. The janitor nodded once. It was authenticated, he agreed. After the edit, a murmur rippled through the room. The defense attorney turned halfway in his seat, staring now, not at the judge, but at the man in the maintenance uniform. "Edited how?" he asked. The janitor took a breath. He had waited years for a room like this to finally ask the right questions. "The camera outside Courtroom B records continuously," he said. "But when the footage is accessed through the courthouse system, it pulls from a process file." He paused. The original file still exists. Silence thickened. The judge's voice cut through it. "Can you prove that?" "Yes," the janitor said calmly. "If you allow it." The judge didn't answer immediately. He glanced at the clerk, then at the bailiff, then at the attorneys, who were suddenly very still. "Proceed," the judge said. The janitor walked to the side door, where courthouse staff usually entered. His steps were steady, unhurried. People watched him go like they were watching someone walk into deep water. He returned a few minutes later with a laptop that looked older than most of the legal team. He placed it carefully on the clerk's desk. "I'm requesting permission," he said, "to access the raw security archive." The prosecutor stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "So, is missing evidence," the judge replied. Permission was granted. The screen lit up. Rows of folders. Dates. Times. The janitor navigated without hesitation. He didn't search. He knew exactly where to go. When the video began to play, the courtroom leaned forward as one. The timestamp rolled. 10:41, 10:42, 10:43. Then, on the prosecution's version, it had always jumped. But here, it didn't. 12 minutes unfolded. 12 minutes that changed everything. A figure entered the hallway. A conversation took place. An exchange no one had testified about. Gasps filled the room. The defense attorney's face drained of color. That's not in discovery, he whispered. The prosecutor said nothing. She was staring at the screen, frozen. The judge raised his hand. Stop the footage. The room went silent again. He looked directly at the janitor. How long have you known about this? The janitor met his gaze. Since the first week of the trial, he said. And why didn't you bring it to the courts sooner? The janitor didn't flinch. I tried, he said, through the proper channels. The clerk swallowed. The bailiff looked away. Everyone suddenly remembered how many warnings they'd ignored over the years, from people they thought didn't matter. The judge turned sharply to the prosecutor. Were you aware of this discrepancy? She hesitated. That hesitation said enough. I need a recess, the judge said. Now. The gavel came down harder than necessary. Outside the courtroom, the hallway exploded with noise. Phones came out. Whispers turned into urgent conversations. Reporters leaned forward, hungry. Inside the courtroom, the janitor sat alone. For the first time in decades, no one ignored him. The defense attorney approached slowly. I don't even know your name, he said quietly. The janitor looked up. That's never stopped the truth before. The attorney nodded. Were you trained? He asked carefully. The janitor considered the question. Yes, he said. A long time ago. When court resumed, the atmosphere had shifted. The judge's voice was sharper now, more controlled. I want an explanation, he said. On the record. The prosecutor stood. Her words were careful, technical, legal, but they didn't answer the real question. So the judge asked the janitor. Sir, he said, what is your role in this building? The janitor stood again. I'm part of the maintenance staff, he said. And before that, the room held its breath. He hesitated, not out of fear, out of respect, for what the truth would do once spoken. I was an attorney, he said, for 23 years. The room erupted. A lawyer in the gallery laughed in disbelief. A janitor, someone whispered. The judge raised his gavel. Order. The janitor continued. I resigned after a case where evidence was ignored because it was inconvenient. The judge's eyes never left him. And since then, I stayed close to the system, he said, to see if it would ever correct itself. The judge leaned back. Slowly. You understand, he said, that your testimony may fundamentally alter this case. Yes. And you chose to speak today. Yes. Why now? The janitor looked around the courtroom. At the defendant. At the attorneys. At the walls that had heard too many lies. Because silence stopped being neutral, he said. The judge nodded once. That nod carried weight. Motion granted, he said. We will review all security footage in full. The prosecutor closed her eyes. The defense attorney exhaled like someone who had been holding his breath for weeks. As the courtroom cleared, the janitor remained seated. A reporter approached the bailiff. Who is he? She whispered. The bailiff shook his head. No idea. That was no longer true. They were about to find out. Outside, cameras waited. Inside, the system had cracked. Not because of a speech. Not because of a protest. But because a man everyone ignored finally decided to speak. And once the truth was heard in open court, it could never be mopped away again. The courtroom never truly calmed down again. Even after the judge called for order, even after the doors closed, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. Heavy, like air before a storm. Outside, reporters crowded the hallway, voices overlapping, cameras already live. Who is he? Was the evidence tampered with? How long has this been hidden? Inside, the janitor sat exactly where he had been sitting for years. Near the back. Out of the way. Only now, everyone knew he was there. The judge ordered a full review of all security footage connected to the case. Not selectively. Not summarized. Everything. The clerk's fingers shook slightly as she typed the order. She had been here long enough to know what this meant. This wasn't about one missing clip. This was about trust. Court adjourned early that day, not because they were finished, because they were no longer prepared. The prosecution team retreated into a private conference room, voices low but sharp. The defense attorney stepped outside, rubbing his face, already dialing his client. And the janitor? No one told him where to go. So he stayed. A bailiff finally approached. "Sir," he said awkwardly, "you can wait in the staff area if you want." The janitor nodded politely. "I'm fine here." The bailiff hesitated, then nodded back. Something had shifted between them. Within hours, the story broke. Not officially, not carefully. It leaked. A courthouse janitor, former attorney, missing evidence. Those words weren't meant to be in the same headline, but they were. By evening, every legal network was running some version of the same question. How could this happen? They debated procedures. They speculated about misconduct. They analyzed the janitor's past like it was a mystery novel. No one mentioned the obvious truth. Everyone had seen him. No one had looked. At home, he watched the coverage with the sound off. His small apartment hadn't changed in years. Same chair, same lamp, same stack of books by the window. He turned the TV off. This part was never his goal. Exposure wasn't the same as justice. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. Security tightened. Staff whispered. Eyes followed him wherever he walked. Some with curiosity, some with embarrassment, some with fear. A junior clerk stopped him near the elevators. "I'm sorry," she blurted out. He looked at her gently. "For what?" "For not listening," she said. He smiled faintly. "You're listening now." Behind closed doors, panic spread. Internal audits were ordered. IT staff were questioned. Old decisions resurfaced. People who had once dismissed concerns now scrambled to document compliance. The system was protecting itself. Clumsily, a senior administrator requested a meeting. She closed the door carefully. "We need to understand why you didn't escalate this further," she said. He folded his hands. "I did," he replied. "Multiple times." She shifted uncomfortably. "Why didn't you go public?" He met her eyes. "Because truth without process becomes spectacle," he said. "And spectacle doesn't last." She had no response. The judge requested a private conversation. No reporters. No clerks. Just the two of them. "I've been on the bench for 30 years, the judge said. "I pride myself on procedure." The janitor listened. "And yet," the judge continued, "this happened under my watch." Silence sat between them. "You didn't break the system," the judge said finally. "You revealed it." The janitor nodded. "That's usually how it feels," he said. The footage review confirmed everything. Not just the missing 12 minutes. Patterns. Edits. Delays. Selective preservation. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger alarms individually. Devastating when seen together. The case was reopened. Charges were reconsidered. A motion for dismissal was filed. The courtroom filled again, this time with tension of a different kind. The defendant looked at the janitor with disbelief. "You saved me," he whispered. The janitor shook his head. "I didn't," he said. "The truth did." As proceedings resumed, attention shifted. From a defendant to the system. Committees were formed. Oversight demanded. Careers quietly placed on pause. People who once spoke confidently now chose their words carefully. One afternoon, a reporter caught up to him outside. "Why did you stay silent for so long?" she asked. He considered the question. "Because silence lets you see who people really are," he said. "And speaking tells you whether they're ready to change." She lowered her microphone slowly. The courthouse janitor was no longer invisible. But he hadn't become loud. He still arrived early. Still cleaned the floors. The difference was this. Now, when people talked around him, they assumed he was listening. And they were right. The courtroom was full again. Not because of curiosity, because of consequence. Every seat was taken. Reporters lined the walls. Cameras were positioned carefully, as if afraid to miss something that could never be replayed. The janitor stood near the side entrance, hands folded in front of him. Same posture, same calm, different weight. The judge entered without ceremony. No small talk, no delay. This court is now in session. The gavel struck once. Final. The prosecution spoke first. Not with confidence, with caution. Their argument was careful, technical, stripped of emotion. They acknowledged the footage discrepancy without admitting intent. They spoke of procedural oversights and systemic gaps. No one interrupted. No one believed them. Then the defense stood. This time, there was no desperation, only clarity. They walked the court through the full footage. Every minute, every angle. They let the truth speak for itself. When the 12 missing minutes played again, the room held its breath. No gas this time, just recognition. The judge turned to the janitor. "Sir," he said, "you are aware you may be called as a witness." "Yes," the janitor replied. "Do you understand the significance of your testimony?" "I do." "Then take the stand." The room shifted, not dramatically, respectfully. He stepped forward and sat. For the first time in his life, he was elevated above the room, not by status, but by necessity. "State your name for the record," the judge said. He did. A simple name. No titles. No footnotes. "You were previously an attorney," the judge continued. "Yes." "You are currently employed here as maintenance staff." "Yes." "And you discovered discrepancies in the evidence presented to this court." "Yes." The judge paused. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" The question everyone wanted answered. He didn't rush. "Because evidence without willingness becomes noise," he said. And for a long time, no one here was willing to listen. The prosecutor objected. Speculation. The judge raised a hand. Overruled. He leaned forward. "Continue." "I reported the issue through internal channels," the janitor said. "Multiple times." The responses were polite, non-committal, then absent. He looked around the room. "I waited because I believed the system would correct itself. And when it didn't, I spoke." The judge nodded slowly. When silence would have made me complicit." The room went still. The prosecutor tried again. "Isn't it true," she said carefully, "that you could have misunderstood the footage?" The janitor met her eyes. "If I had misunderstood it," he said, "the missing 12 minutes wouldn't appear in the same place every time." He paused. "They wouldn't disappear only after processing." No further questions. The judge dismissed the witness. As he stepped down, something subtle happened. People moved out of his way, not because they were told to, because they understood. The judge took a long breath. "I have reviewed the evidence," he said. "Not just what was presented, but what was omitted." He looked directly at the prosecution table. This court cannot ignore deliberate gaps in disclosure. The prosecutor lowered her eyes. "The charges," the judge continued, "are hereby dismissed." A wave moved through the room. Relief. Shock. Disbelief. The defendant covered his face with his hands. But the judge wasn't finished. "This court also orders an independent investigation into evidence handling procedures." His voice hardened. "This matter does not end here." The gavel came down. Once. Twice. It was over. Outside, cameras surged. Questions flew. "Do you feel like a hero? Will you return to practicing law? Why did you wait so long?" He answered none of them. Inside, the courtroom slowly emptied. The janitor remained seated. Alone. The judge approached him quietly. "You could have destroyed careers today," the judge said. "I didn't," the janitor replied. "The truth did." The judge nodded. "You reminded us why this place exists." Later that evening, he returned to his small apartment. No celebration. No phone calls. Just quiet. He sat by the window and watched the city settle into night. A knock came at the door. It was the defendant. "I don't know how to thank you," the man said. The janitor shook his head. "You don't thank people for telling the truth," he said. "You carry it forward." When the door closed, he stood still for a long moment. 20 years. One sentence. That was all it took. The next morning, he returned to the courthouse. Same cart. Same mop. But when he walked through the halls, people stepped aside. Not out of fear. Out of awareness. He stopped in front of the courtroom door, ran his hand along the frame, and whispered something no one else could hear. "Not today," because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives quietly, carried by the person everyone forgot to notice. The courthouse did not celebrate. There were no speeches, no press releases praising integrity, no plaques mounted on walls. Instead, there was discomfort, the kind that settles in quietly long after the cameras leave. In the weeks that followed the verdict, the building changed its rhythm. Not visibly, not dramatically, but people walked slower, spoke softer. They checked what they said before saying it, especially near hallways, elevators, and corners where they once assumed no one important was listening. The janitor noticed. He always did. The investigation moved forward without him. Committees formed. Audits expanded. Names were reviewed carefully, then quietly removed from rosters. No public scandals. No dramatic firings. Just absence. People who had once held authority were suddenly unavailable. Transferred. Retired. Reassigned. The system corrected itself the only way it knew how, without admitting fault. The judge continued to preside, but he asked more questions now, paused longer, listened harder. Once, during a routine hearing, he stopped mid-sentence and glanced toward the back of the room, toward where the janitor usually stood. The seat was empty. The judge waited anyway, then continued. Reporters tried for weeks to get a follow-up interview. They never did. The janitor declined every request politely. "I've said what needed to be said," he told one of them. "Everything else would just be noise." They didn't understand. But then again, they never had. He was offered things. A consulting role, a return to legal practice, a chance to reclaim what was taken. He declined them all, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. Power, he had learned, wasn't about position. It was about proximity to the truth. And he already had that. One afternoon, a young law clerk approached him near the supply closet. "Can I ask you something?" she said nervously. He nodded. "How did you survive it?" she asked. "Being ignored for so long?" He thought about the question carefully. "I stopped measuring myself by their attention," he said, "and started measuring myself by what I knew." She nodded slowly, as if storing the answer for later. The courthouse returned to routine. Cases were heard, arguments made, judgments delivered. But something fundamental had shifted. People knew now that the walls listened, that silence observed. That truth didn't always wear a suit. On his last day, there was no announcement. No cake in the break room. No goodbye email. He finished his shift the same way he always had. Quietly. He placed his mop back in the closet, hung up his uniform, turned off the light, and walked out. At the door, the bailiff stopped him. "You're really leaving?" he asked. "Yes." The bailiff hesitated. "I just wanted to say thank you." The janitor smiled faintly. "For what?" "For reminding us," the bailiff said, "that this place still matters." He nodded once, then stepped into the sunlight. The building stood behind him, unchanged in stone and glass, but altered in memory. Inside those walls, people would always remember the day the truth came from the back of the room, from someone they didn't see coming. Months later, a new case began. Different faces, different names. But when the timeline grew unclear, when evidence felt too neat, someone spoke up sooner than they would have before. Someone quieter, someone careful. The judge listened. The janitor, former attorney, silent witness, forgotten man, never returned. But he didn't need to. He had left something behind. Not a legacy, a warning. That justice doesn't announce itself loudly. That truth doesn't require permission. And that the most dangerous thing a system can do is assume no one is watching.